When my tears turn to laughter, that child long ago, my soul starts to linger. It's home, I know. If you catch me daydreaming now and forever, thoughts are carrying me alone to that place we call home. Down that long road, throughout life we roam. Whenever I go to that place I know.
Often confused with the Strait of Canso or the causeway of the same name, the town of Canso is on the mainland of Nova Scotia. It is in the region, but the town itself is separate. And that separateness, its geography, is its history. It sits on a jut of land stretching out into the Atlantic Ocean. It is one of the most easterly communities in Canada. Over the years, it has been a haven for the people of the sea, a military stronghold, the place where the people heard the news first after they completed the transatlantic cable. Today, as Canso aligns itself toward the future, one thing remains. That is its separateness, its geography. It is a place apart, this haven from the sea. Dawn surrounds the cluster of Canso Islands. Making his way through the Tickle, the channel separating Durrell's Island from headland, Elliot Skinny Lumsden heads past Rosie Ryan's little brown outhouse. On his way to the fishing grounds, Skinny will meet up with brother Russie and helper Jerry, Sorry, Delory, who wait for him. They're anxious to get on with the day.
I see dogfish in her.
Names, landmarks, things that make up the town of Canso.
Pitch that rope there. Pitch your rope. Here. Which one? Pitch your rope there. Make it so good.
Before morning rush hour hits Montreal or Winnipeg, the Lumsden boys will have hauled in their catch and be on their way home. People of Canso, people of the sea. Star of the Sea Church and morning service. The salt water of the Atlantic touches every facet of life here, cementing the closeness of a community bound up in a history of remoteness. A part of the mainland, but more like an island, Canso is separated from the outside by rock, forest, and sea. Gloria Shanahan is a retired teacher.
We are a peninsula. We are an isolated place, situated out into the Atlantic. And somebody asked me one time, well, when you come to Canso, where do you go? Well, I said, you have two choices. You either go back on the road you came in on, or I said, you go in the water and you start swimming for Ireland, because I said, that's the only place you can go.
The closest point to Europe on continental North America. Population, 1,200. Canso is a place whose chance has been historically tied to its emplacement. It is a town where lore is woven into the way of life. Meet Ed Bond, a boat builder in small scale. He has experienced the sea in large scale.
Well, I fished at the Canso all my life, you know, and I went, that's the first time I went, I was about 17 years old. You know, I was in the Belvedere with my father. A 6-dory vessel here, okay? And it's scary, but you had to do it and make a living.
Canso takes on the character of the ocean, drawing people near, a family connectedness. Take Chris Lumsden, for example.
How's everybody today? Who brought their tour guides? Anybody bring their tour guides at all?
Returning to his roots at every opportunity, interpreting history to visitors, is what Chris likes to do.
These will help you quite a bit with the island.
History, like that of Grassy Island. The nucleus of the town of today, it lies hauntingly in the harbor, forever a reminder of Canso's beginnings.
You know, it's just always kind of amazed me that people would have lived over there and that I could be looking out the window and across and there could be a fort over there and there could be houses all the way along and people fishing and soldiers walking around. That gets me. That gets me.
Another side to Canso, dockside. Here the coming and going of vessels continues to drive the rhythm of life. The town's story is tied to competition over the richest fishing grounds in the world. Confrontation between France and Britain, New England and Old England. The cycle of industry has always pivoted on the cycle of the harvest. These days it's shrimp, lobster, crab, destined for international markets. They say that once saltwater gets in the blood, it's part of you forever. The sea is like that. Close by to the prolific Canso fishing banks in Chedabucto Bay, through generations, this jut of land guarded by a cluster of islands has been a base, a coveted anchorage, a supply hold for many. From all over Atlantic Canada, countless vessels work out of here in season. The adopted home of many, Canso is a rendezvous place. Icing up, a ritual that marks the start of every trip out to the fishing banks. Blair Doucette is typical of the captains that base themselves here during the fishing season. The holds of the Fundy leader, filled with ice and stocked with supplies, his sojourn out for the catch will be celebrated on his return at week's end. Called the Forgotten Settlement, barely a trace remains of the foothold to the fisheries and French presence of 1604 on Grassy Island.
Nicholas Denis, he was one of the first men to set up anything permanent. And the French existed there pretty peacefully until the turn of the 17th century, and we had the 1700s. At that time, New Englanders became interested in the same thing. They came north looking for fish too, and thus the conflict begins between French and English. How are we doing back there? We got everybody? Did anybody get lost on the island? There was a period where they would have worked side by side pretty much in harmony, but after a while it just greed took over, and you would have the establishment of Louisbourg, and instead of working side by side, they tended to become enemies, and that's what happened here.
A small fort, built by the British to support New England's claims over fish stocks, was taken out by the French in 1744. Grassy Island later became the New England base, which would lead to the loss of France's stronghold on adjoining Cape Breton Island.
This was the outside wall of the fort, and there were notches in the wall for the cannons to shoot out towards the harbor.
It was from Canso that Pepperell's fleet sailed to Louisbourg. There were 3 attacks on Louisbourg, but it was the first attack that enabled the British in the second and third attack to finally conquer Louisbourg.
With the fall of the Dunkirk of America, dominance over the fisheries created bullion for the British Empire. But the drive to find better ways of shipping in pre-refrigeration days resulted in a shift of locale.
At that time, it was a wet fishery. They would catch the fish and clean the fish, and salt the fish right on the vessel, just put huge amounts of salt, and then sail back. Later on, the methods changed, and they found that they could keep the fish fresh longer if they took the fish ashore and did the same process, only dried them on the shore with sunlight and again, huge amounts of salt. And they found that that would keep the fish a lot fresher for the trip back to Europe.
The mainland had the needed acreage for the drying racks, and so, at the start of the 19th century, the community retrenched along the shore. The new times saw Canso come under the influence of one family, an influence that would carry on for over a century. Expanded trade with the Mediterranean and West Indies would create an age of prosperity.
Abraham Whitman came, and he was in the shipping business of sending fish and produce overseas. So he, being a merchant with lots of money, he saw in Canso a great potential. His son took over the boat and looked after the shipping of merchandise, and he built a small store. It burned several years later, but it was rebuilt, and it was built on a much larger scale. And with the building of his store, not only did they have the store, but they had the coal that was brought in. So it had employed many people, and they provided all the necessities that we had.
When Abraham Whitman arrived in 1817, there were only 5 families living in a place that began its trading career 300 years earlier. By the First War, surrounding population was 3,000.
They contributed greatly to building the town. C.H. Whitman was mayor of the town for many years. They were active in anything that they could bring into the town to build up and employ. They were very education-minded, and they built their churches, supported them, and the churches grew. They were builders, and they had foresight, and they could see ahead, and they built for the future.
Incorporated at the turn of the century, Canso was destined to take on a role in linking 2 hemispheres, becoming a town through which the news of the Old World and the New World would pass. Mackerel and herring. The Lumsden boys haul in their bounty out at the mouth of Chedabucto Bay in a way unchanged over time. They'll now head back through the Tickle to Homeport, the oldest in the Maritimes. From the waters of the region, today's harvests also include the massive tuna, 6 species of which are caught in Atlantic Canada. This one, landed by angling and weighing in at around 400 kilograms, 900 pounds, will fetch about $6,000 to $8,000 on the market, primarily concentrated in Japan.
$8.75 plus the pound.
The center of seasonal activity, the town dock has played this role since the 1800s and the Whitman era.
They built the wharf because they had to have a wharf for their shipping. There was no wharf there. When they built their store, there was absolutely no wharf there at all. And their vessel would have to come in and tie up to whatever, a rock or whatever. We had a big rock down on the beach, and there was an iron ring into it, and I always thought that maybe they used that to tie their boats to.
Landmarks, lore of the sea, remembering, history in song.
Fiddler's Green would be sailor's heaven. There's a lot of sailors that probably went to heaven here, or we'd hope they would have. I learned this song from my uncles. It's an old Irish tune, or I think it's an old Irish tune. That's where I learned it. It's kind of a hand-me-down. Anyway, it's got a lot of nice images of the sea, and maybe more so from an old sailor's perspective. As they walk by the dockside, it's so fair to view the salt water and taste the sea air. A light-hearted old fisherman sing his song. Won't you take me away, boys? The time is not long. Wrap me up in your skin and jumper. More on the dockside.
We call it longliners. That's still my favorite boat, is a longliner. They always say a fisherman, he worked hard for what he made. And any man's got money today if he's a fisherman, but he worked for what he got. A friend of mine by the name of Ellie Snow, well, he made the first models, and he used to be a boat builder anyway, okay? And I got the molds from him. And the dories, a fellow by the name of Edison Lumsden had one in Canyon Town here, a good friend of mine. And he gave me the dory to make a model offer. So that's how I got started doing the dory models. So I appreciate what them for, help me out. And then I got some favors yet to return it. I thought yet, but I never returned them yet, but I hope that pretty soon I will. Most of them, what I make them out of is, somewhere happened to give me a piece of yellow birch plywood, 1/4 inch. I generally make them all out of them. And not very often I get that stuff, but somewhere happened to give me a junk, well, I'll build them a dory in a favor, for the piece of wood.
For Ed Bond, each plank laid calls back a memory of life on the Grand Banks.
We used to call them Nuremberg dories, and you were fired off the side of the vessels. You were going full tilt, 4 tubs of gear, and the 2 men being the dories. And it's scary. Then they set their gear, and then they come back aboard the vessel again. In an hour or so, or an hour and a half, the skipper drop them back off again. The vessel come up to each dory, and he'll fork his fish aboard her, and they'll lighten them dories, and then they'll haul the rest of the gear, and then they'll steam back to the vessel, eh? My favorite boat's that one there. That vessel right there. That's my favorite. We call it longliners.
I'll see you someday.
The late 19th century. And on Norris Hill, the Western Union Telegraph Company and the Commercial Cable Company at nearby Hazel Hill were landing the transatlantic cable from England. The Titanic, declarations of war. Overnight, Canso was at the center of North American communications.
The operators, they came here and they helped to open up the economy. They lent a great deal to the town. Different people lived here. They brought in their customs and their ways of living and their talents, and together it made for a multifaceted community.
On Hazel Hill and in parts of Canso are reminders of that 80-year period when excitement rang out over 7,000 nautical miles of cable strung along the ocean floor, linking Europe through Canso to New York. But the technology, as relevant as today's modems and fax machines, was bound for change.
So Canso was an extremely important place, but with the development of the overseas telephone communication, when the Queen picked up the phone and said to Mr. Diefenbaker, "Greetings," that's what closed our cable station.
This would have been a very comfortable spot to live as far as the winds and the weather goes. He had a great view of everything that was going on.
Canso, its name known in Micmac as Kamsock, meaning opposite the lofty cliffs, is one of the oldest place names on the continent. we are reminded that countries waged war over this threshold to the Grand Banks and of the town's place in shipbuilding and trade. But forever, we're reminded that Canso owes its history to its geography. It is this distinction, like an island, that continues to shape it.
Ready, Blaine?
Yep, all set to unload.
Go ahead.
The return of the Fundy leader, and many like her, marks the end of another week. Before local celebrations kick in, there's much to do. Unloading, tallying, catching up on the news. Over time, it is here that the Micmac met the French. New Englanders met Jerseymen. The Mediterranean met the West Indies. The Old World met the New. It is here where the quintal of fish was once the unit of currency. And it is here where the men of Canso boasted that their produce was worth more to the revenues of Great Britain than that of any other British colony. Canso, the cradle of Atlantic Canada. But remember that being a rendezvous place, a haven from the sea, is just one of the parts that make up this place.
When the Whitmans came, they opened up the center part of the town, and people came in and settled in the center part of town. And people who lived in Irish Town didn't get along that well with the people in the center town. They resented the fact that there was another part of town being developed. And so they always called them the down-alongers. And then, when the Tickle opened up, that area opened up, they were known as the up-alongers. So we had the up-alongers, the center town, and the down-alongers, the three sections of Canso.
Up along, down along, the Tickle and Rosie Ryans, Skinny and Russie and Sorry Delory, Dories and Longliners. Names and landmarks, parts of the town of Canso, parts that draw one home.
I'm far more comfortable myself when things are laid back. If I want to go for a walk on the beach, I can go for a walk on the beach, and I don't have to go drive 14 miles before I find the beach. Always like the outdoors as woods and the water, and that's where I'm most comfortable, by far. Whenever there's a chance to come back, I'm always here.